set of rules. And at the same time, the chaos is growing. The old balances of powers are crumbling, and norms and rules are being rewritten in all areas of interstate relations. The key reason for this is in the lack of desire of the so-called West, headed up by the United States, to recognize the fact that the multipolar world has become a reality. We can clearly see that the Euro-Atlantic elites are trying to preserve their dominance, which quite recently seemed without an alternative. A German philosopher, Walter Schubert, back in the beginning of the 20th century, said this about the English. They, unlike other peoples, look at the world in the eyes of someone who's looking at a factory, and they are looking to get income and profit and nothing else. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, we had an opportunity to watch how the successors of the English, the Americans, were building this factory of theirs, or I would say a corporation that is now squeezing the profits out of its operations around the world. Many countries, such as Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, or Iraq, felt the brunt of this business model. Since the beginning of this new century, something went wrong for the Euro-Atlantists. States and peoples started reminding Washington firmly and rigidly about their geopolitical subjectivity. The world financial cataclysm of 2008 showed the really feeble foundation that the West built for the global liberal economy. By this point in time, new sources of growth, stable growth, haven't been found. In the Western countries themselves, people ended up not being ready for the aftermath of the crisis, which was quite harsh, nor for the experiments of the elites in the area of multiculturalism and the substitution of their traditional identity with something else. The proof of that is the growth of popularity of anti-systemic and nationally oriented and populist forces. The society is sending the authorities in those countries a clear signal that it feels deceived, and the latter, without responding adequately, are mumbling something about an external intervention and arranging witch hunts. Many of these problems would have lost their relevance had the Western elites learned to look at international relations not as a zero-sum game, but as a method for joint decision or joint solution to the problems that have accumulated. But the global corporation cannot stop expanding and allow for the profits to fall. It would rather destroy the world's legal system and the security architecture that have become irrelevant and inconvenient for them. Driven by these egotistic motives, the Americans and their allies that are subordinate to them are increasingly using forceful methods to promote their interests. Instead of negotiations, they are taking steps to destabilize the situation in most regions of the world. And they are increasingly acting without looking back at the norms of international rules and sometimes against common sense. A clear example of that is the situation around Venezuela, which today is being cut up using the same templates as was used in Libya or Syria. The White House has been talking about the dangers of uncontrolled migration, and it wants to spend billions on building the wall with Mexico, and at the same time it's fanning a new civil conflict and provoking yet another humanitarian catastrophe. And this time, this is almost nearly its doorstep. This Complacency and self-deception is one of the key challenges of international security. This reckless behavior is shown not only with regard to Venezuela, which the United States consider, based on their behavior, nearly their own province. We can see how the United States, the United Kingdom, and their most loyal NATO allies gradually refuse to follow the basic rules and multilateral regimes, even in so important areas as arms control and WMDs. And they are violating the principle of free trade, which is the fundamental principle for the global financial architecture that they themselves built to begin with. They arbitrarily interpret international rules, and they make strikes against sovereign states, killing dozens and hundreds of civilians, and they introduce sanctions against their geopolitical competitors. However, the whole notion of law has been turned into a travesty after the British started using the expression of highly likely, which other countries of the West consider to be sufficient for expelling en masse Russian diplomats from their countries. And of course, they received a very prompt response to that. That was a mirror of their actions. The decision of the United States to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and the Golan Heights as the sovereign territory of Israel, despite the UN resolution, and their unilateral withdrawal from the Iranian nuclear deal, is something that undermines collective efforts to stabilize the situation in the Middle East and in central part of Asia. Moreover, under threat is now the whole principle of crisis resolution through multilateral negotiations. The emphasis on the use of force without going by the principle of sovereignty and territorial integrity and non-intervention in the affairs of other countries. This is a basic element of the doctrinal documents of the Trump administration, including the national security strategy and the counter-terrorist strategy of the United States. Against this backdrop, many regional states are beginning to behave more aggressively, counting that some border conflicts and disputes would be resolved, or they can really reinforce their own political positions. And this causes a chain reaction. Collective mechanisms of responding to challenges are under more threat and erosion. Instead of weighted decision-making, we use and see impulsivity and negativistic approaches. There is an increasing risk of the so-called accidental conflicts that can arise out of unilateral and spontaneous actions of certain players, and cannot really be predicted or calculated. Increasingly greater strata of populations are getting drawn into various types of conflicts of different intensity. And as a result, even a small provocation could be sufficient to initiate a planetary crisis. Let's remember World War I. None of the great powers, as it is believed, was ready to start that war. However, all of them fell into this war and then paid dozens of millions of lives, and some of them disappeared from the geopolitical map of the world. 100 years ago, state leaders in their own justification could refer to the lack of international legal mechanisms to settle conflicts at the early stages. But today, such tools do exist. However, the so-called West and the United States primarily have been consistently destroying it, and they are not suggesting anything in exchange other than the iron fist or empty declarations about allegedly strengthening a universal liberal world order, and that is something that their own authors do not believe in, the reality of that. This reckless behavior can be explained by the fact that the United States do not have such a historic trauma that is associated with the war as other nations have, especially countries like Russia and the European nations. But the world of today, and by the way, thanks to the efforts of the United States themselves, have become so interrelated and interdependent, so small and so flat that even the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans can no longer be considered a reliable defense against a possible global conflict. Russia, that has survived 3 devastating wars of the last century, consistently calls upon other members of the international community to look for solutions to the problems that have accumulated jointly. Unfortunately, even in those areas where such negotiations are underway, such as the fight against terrorism or information security, our Western partners essentially continue to keep their fingers crossed behind their backs. It doesn't mean that we need to sever all of our contacts and pursue a self-isolation or isolate them. The dialogue needs to be continued, as if only to prevent the existing international system from crumbling, which still essentially provides for strategic stability. Under this present tense situation, we need to go down the path of essentially strengthening the global formats, while at the same time improving and transforming them in the interest of peace and security around the world. If the so-called West doesn't have the maturity and courage to move in that direction, the other centers of power will have to project the global future without the West. And to replace the liberal universalism, a new world order will have to come. It will be a fair and stable world order. It will have to be created on those conditions and foundations and in those forms that will ensure that states can exist and coexist peacefully together with regional unions of those states, so that every state would have the right to develop along its own principles, the right to continue developing in their own way. And I'm sure that this is something that will be increasingly drawing those healthy forces in the Western countries that do understand the issues standing in front of the world community, see the risks, and are interested in self-protection and self-preservation. The contours of the coming world order are still uncertain. Whether this is something that will ensure true unity in diversity, or whether this will become once again a veil for the power of the narrow circle of the elites, will depend on what we do together with you. The Moscow Conference on International Security is a wonderful platform for such type of work on deepening our cooperation in the area of global and regional security. Thank you very much. To begin the third plenary session, we would like to ask the speakers to take their seats at the podium.
Distinguished speakers, you're welcome to the stage.
Уважаемые дамы и господа,
Dear ladies and gentlemen,
доброе утро.
good morning.
Начинаем
We are beginning our third
заседание,
plenary session
посвященное вопросам
on
международного
international
миротворчества.
peacekeeping efforts.
Сначала я бы хотел
At the
представить
beginning, I would like
наших
to introduce
сегодняшних
our today's
участников.
participants and speakers.
David
David Edgarovich Tanayan, the Minister of Defense of the Republic of Armenia. Nyamagin Angbold, the Minister of Defense of Mongolia. General Lieutenant Ibrahim Gaseyev, the Minister of Defense of the Republic of South Ossetia. Charles Richard Mongeau, the Minister of National Defense of the Republic of the Congo. Sanjay Mitra, the first Deputy Defense Minister of the Republic of India. Ms. Gladys Pecci, Deputy Minister of Defense of the Republic of Paraguay. And Peter Tikhanovsky, Deputy General Secretary of the Organization for Collective Security Organization. Dear ladies and gentlemen, the situation in the global security area is characterized by the complexity and intertwined relations of various states. The geography of conflicts is expanding. They are becoming more and more versatile, and they have different regional characteristics. And today in conflict zones, they use modern state-of-the-art weapon systems, from portable air defense systems and anti-tank rockets and UAVs. We can see there are a lot of suicide terrorists. And the traditional function of peacekeeping, such as de-escalation of tensions between the parties, the reduction of risks of the forceful confrontation, and providing guarantees of security to the parties is becoming even more important, but it's also very difficult to implement. Contemporary peacekeeping operations is not just specialized type of mission. These are very complex, multi-component and multifaceted operations. And this calls for a need to re-look at and revise our approaches to training of the troops in the peacekeeping missions and their supplies. The peacekeeping missions of the United Nations need well-prepared troops with a high level of discipline and motivation and readiness to prepare for their task implementation. And the role of female troops is also growing. We need to take into account the fact that as these troops get prepared, the regional specifics of the region of the mission will have to be taken into account. To achieve these goals, the 2015 system for peacekeeping readiness is something that will serve this mission. This is something that is aimed at improving the effectiveness and predictability of the response to the emerging threats to world peace and security. And the organizations that are in the reserves, such as national troops units, will have the necessary equipment, arms, and self-support equipment and property. They are ready to be deployed and fulfill their missions in the crisis zone reliably. Today, peacekeeping is of comprehensive nature, and under these conditions it is extremely important to exchange and share our experience and propagate the best practices that various countries have. Dear ladies and gentlemen, yesterday the issues of international peacekeeping and military cooperation were actually discussed at a roundtable discussion. Various ideas were expressed by the experts, and they really are worthy of being studied further and in detail. At today's plenary session, we will try to develop further those suggestions and to improve this very important area of cooperation. And before I give the floor to our respected and distinguished speakers, I would like to remind you that we will have a time limit when you speak from the podium of this forum. It's 10 minutes, and we plan on finishing this work at 11:30. And I would like to give the floor first to the Under-Secretary General for Peace Operations, Mr. Jean-Pierre Lacroix. Mr. Lacroix has been occupying this post since 2015, and then before that, for more than 25 years, he was involved in political and diplomatic work, primarily related with multilateral programs under the United Nations auspices. He worked as an advisor in the cabinet of the Prime Minister of France. Today, since he heads up the Department for Peacekeeping Operations, he provides political and directive leadership for all UN peacekeeping operations. Mr. Lacroix, you get the floor.
Thank you very much, Your Excellencies, Ministers, Excellencies, colleagues. I'm pleased to speak with you today regarding our efforts to enhance United Nations peacekeeping operation, as well as to emphasize the importance of your support for this vital work. But before doing so, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Russian Federation for inscribing peacekeeping as one of the topics to be discussed at this conference, and for its invitation to me to participate. The Russian Federation plays an important role with regard to peacekeeping operation as a permanent member of the Security Council, of course, but also as a financial contributor, as well as a troop and police contributor. And I would like to thank the Russian Federation for its men and women who serve in 8 peacekeeping operations. I would like to pay tribute to the Russian personnel who lost their lives serving UN peacekeeping. And today I'm proud to wear the pin of the Russian Association of UN Peacekeeping Veteran. I was pleased to meet the director of this association yesterday. And again, thank you for all what the Russian Federation is doing to support us. As you're well aware, peacekeeping operations have a direct impact on the lives of hundreds of thousands of children, women, and men across the globe. And every day as we speak, the peacekeepers are working very hard to deliver on their mandates, in many places putting their own lives at risk. However, as you already know, peacekeeping is facing a multitude of challenges. And those challenges include increasing threats, diminishing content of the parties, complex mandates, staggering protection tasks, unclear prospects of exit, and too often, unfortunately, lack of progress in political processes. And in too many instances, peacekeepers are no longer protected by the UN flag. Actually, they become a target. And this is why we've had so many peacekeepers who lost their lives in the recent years. And of course, I would also want to take this opportunity to pay tribute to all of them. And it's a pleasure to be here today with so many representatives of our troop and police contributing countries, including many of my fellow panelists. I would like to greet them and to thank them. The problems peacekeeping is facing today are exacerbated by the changing nature of conflict. We have now intrastate conflicts in most cases that are coupled with the rise of transnational phenomenon, such as illegal criminal activities, international terrorism, and this is all compounded by the role of new technologies. Weak governance, insufficient responses to grievances can feed the cycle of violence and complicate the path to peace. We face longer-running conflicts today, where achieving sustainable peace depends on tackling multiple dimensions of these conflicts, as our operation in Mali or the Central African Republic or the DR Congo demonstrate. Ladies and gentlemen, peacekeeping is not mentioned in the UN Charter, as you know, but it finds its roots in the Charter's ideals and principles. The non-use of force, peaceful settlement of disputes, non-intervention, cooperation, and the sovereign equality of member states. All these remain the foundation of international relations. Peacekeeping's own three basic principles, which are impartiality, consent of the parties, and non-use of force except in self-defense and defense of the mandate, derive from these principles. Peacekeeping missions are really the quintessential, collectively funded multilateral peace and security instrument, one that combines political engagement with military, police, technical capabilities to foster peace in countries at war. They derive their authority from the Charter's universality, which brings together all member states and international actors to develop unified responses to these challenges. As you're well aware, peacekeeping is fundamentally a political tool to support the implementation and achievement of peaceful settlement. This is really what peacekeeping is about. And inevitably, when we find a peacekeeping mission facing operational crisis, a political crisis lies at its root. And we all agree its peacekeeping strength is political role, but we must do better at taking the primacy of political. In other words, the strengthened efforts to achieve durable political solution is really essential. And we put a lot of emphasis on this in the Secretariat, the Secretary General's initiative, Action for Peacekeeping. The Security Council provides peacekeeping operation their mandate, and it is important to make sure that we have a strong, united Security Council, and that we should have a council that gives us mandates that are both targeted, prioritized, with a sense of hierarchy among the different tasks that peacekeeping is given. The General Assembly, of course, plays a very important role too. It's the General Assembly of the United Nations that provides us with our finance and our budgets. And the committee, the Special Committee on Peacekeeping, so-called C34, really provides an invaluable guidance to us. And we are, as Secretariat, regularly in touch with the C34, particularly as we are now in the process of explaining what actions we are implementing against the backdrop of our initiative, Action for Peacekeeping. And we look forward to continuing this very intense engagement with our member states, with the T34, and of course with our troop and police contributing countries and host state, as well as a regional organization, as we move towards implementing our commitments. In line with our commitments through the Action for Peacekeeping initiative, we continue to work to strengthen performance of peacekeeping. First, the link between performance and safety of security of peacekeepers is clear, and enhancing both is an utmost priority. This includes a renewed commitment, together with our highest risk missions, to implement our action plan on improving the security of peacekeepers, which is really a plan to improve performance as a whole. We're putting in place a comprehensive system to assess our mission's overall performance, as well as the performance of military and formed police units. For our military personnel, we established a clear framework of performance standards and assessments based on regular performance evaluation of military units, including on command and control, protection of civilians, conduct and discipline, and training. We're currently in the process of establishing a similar process of performance evaluation for formed police units. We have also stepped up our efforts to make sure that the units joining our missions meet our operational readiness standards before they are deployed, including through the development of a new methodology for pre-deployment evaluations. Units with shortfalls can now be identified and engaged proactively to receive targeted training and equipment support. Second, we're being smarter about the implementation of protection of civilian mandates, which is now one of the key priorities in our mandate. The mission's protection strategy should bring together the mission's unique civilian, political, military, police, and logistical capacities, creating a unity of effort to identify civilians at risk, to identify the threats in the environment in which our peacekeepers are evolving, so that we can prevent and respond to these threats. And of course, the ability of having a better situational awareness and to have a better expertise at that is one of the crucial priorities in that regard. The focus must first be on prevention by engaging in dialogue and by helping establish a protecting environment, including by supporting the presence of state authority. However, where efforts at prevention fail or violence is ongoing, our operations play an indispensable role in providing physical protection to civilians, sometimes using force, again, in defense of our mandates, which include the protection of civilians in most of our big operations. Over the past several years, we have strengthened our ability to deploy tailored protection strategies for the places where we are deployed, such as the deployment of early warning networks in the Democratic Republic of Congo. In peacekeeping, a lack of proper training undermines our performance, hinders our efforts to implement mandates, and puts our peacekeepers at risk. We're planning special emphasis on strengthening our pre-deployment training and assessment and enhancing leadership training and in-mission training, including tabletop and command post exercises on scenarios like CASEVAC. In addition, the police division has launched the UN Police Training Architecture Program in cooperation with member states. We look to our member states to fulfill their commitment, including to help us in our efforts to strengthen training, both pre-deployment as well as in-mission training. And we already have received, on the occasion of the high-level ministerial meeting that was held in New York just a couple of weeks ago, a number of pledges regarding training, and we're very grateful for that. Training is definitely a key priority. Another priority is to increase the number of women in peacekeeping. We do know that more women in peacekeeping means a more effective peacekeeping, and we are experiencing this on a day-to-day basis everywhere. So please, dear colleagues from member states, continue your efforts in order to increase the number of women in peacekeeping. And of course, conduct and discipline, the zero-tolerance policy regarding, in particular, sexual exploitation and abuse in peacekeeping is a major priority. The member states' commitments are clear through the voluntary compact on the elimination of sexual exploitation and abuse, which has now 101 signatories, and a circle of leadership, which includes 72 sitting and former heads of state and government. But we must do more. We must continue our efforts so as to be more informed about allegations of sexual exploitation and abuse, as well as to be more reactive and to have our member states further increase their reactivity. Ladies and gentlemen, the Action for Peacekeeping initiative, which has been endorsed by 151 member states, emphasizes that all peacekeeping stakeholders have a role in ensuring the success of peacekeeping. To adapt to more complex and high-risk conflicts, our peacekeeping missions must become more mobile and more proactive. For example, the United Nations now has verified military units on standby that can be deployed in less than 60 days. In Mali, we have an urgent need for armored personnel carriers that greatly improve chances of surviving an attack. This is an operation where more than 19 peacekeepers have been killed and 397 injured since the establishment of MINUSMA in 2013. In the Central African Republic and many other missions, we need helicopters that can operate 24/7 for medical and casualty evacuations from remote areas. Elsewhere, we need armed utility helicopters, intelligent peacekeeping intelligence expertise for a better situational awareness to prevent threats on us and on civilians, surveillance and reconnaissance units, quick reaction forces capacities, and air medical evacuation team. A critical part of fulfilling these and other needs is ensuring that our troops and police contributing countries are trained and equipped to carry out their mandates. 3 weeks ago, as I mentioned, we had 130 member states represented at the ministerial meeting on peacekeeping in New York, 60 at ministerial level. Performance and protection on the was a key theme of that meeting on the 29th of March, and I was very glad to meet with the distinguished Russian delegation that participated in this high-level meeting, as well as with many of you, including some of our fellow panelists. A number of pledges were made. I mentioned pledges on training. There were also pledges on capacities, which were very much appreciated. I think this was indicative of the common determination and willingness to work together so as to improve the effectiveness and impact of peacekeeping. But I do emphasize that it is a global effort. It needs stronger political efforts. It needs continuous effort aimed at fulfilling our commitment regarding performance, regarding partnership with regional, sub-regional organization is also very important. Our continuous effort regarding conduct and discipline, and certainly the efforts to increase the number of women. I do believe that we have a good momentum. I'm happy to be present and participating in this conference, and I look forward to today's debate. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Lacroix, for a comprehensive presentation. The role of United Nations is a key thing, and of course this information which was provided about the UN efforts to ensure both government and non-government entities in conduct of peacekeeping operations. In line with the plan, I'd like to give the floor to David Edgarovich Tanayan, the Defense Minister of Armenia. He is a permanent member of our event. He's got great experience in the work of the state bodies of Armenia. Mr. Minister, the floor is yours. Esteemed colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, before I proceed, I would like to join the words of thanks to the Minister of Defense and personally to the General of the Army, Mr. Shoigu, for inviting us to take part in traditional International Moscow Conference on Security and discussion of most burning issues of the day. In security, exchange of opinion is extremely important to enhance the predictability in international relations. And the topic of our today's plenary session is the logical continuation and further development of previous year discussion of global and regional problems, and also initiative of the UN Secretary General to support peace A4P format. We feel concerned the escalation of tension in international relations, degrading of mechanisms to ensure security, and prominent enlargement of the zones of conflict and state crises on ethnic and confessional ground. At the same time, our world became more interconnected, where any instability in most various regions causes serious consequences, and such situation of threats and instability is very worrying. And these circumstances put everybody in the world to ensure dynamic development and to reconsider the criteria of peacekeeping activity, which was given in the declaration of UN document to support peace and the serious changes in anti-crisis control, and some mechanisms are really obsolete. And having said that, we need to continue the discussion on the legal grounds for the mission, partnership, interaction, and the forces which are to be used in specific cases, legitimate things. It's based on the perception of the parties of law and morality, and holds the basic place in the missions of peacekeeping. And legitimate aspect, that is the legitimacy of the government and that of the mission. And when peacekeeping missions, the international community should strictly adhere to two basic UN principles. The first is the international mission should be conducted with the agreement of the legal authority of the recipient country, and peacekeeping forces should be absolutely impartial. And another mission is the interaction between different partners or interested parties in that mission. In this context, a special role is being played by cooperation and coordination of actions between different actors, which is a key prerequisite to complete any peacekeeping mission. And peacekeeping forces should possess the mandate and should be ready to act in the framework of international humanitarian right and basing on the mission which was assigned to these forces. And instead of just military tasks where we have the military contingent will give way to the mixed police and civilian personnel, and actually, instead of the military approach, there will be a more civilian approach. So the basic tendency to develop the international peacekeeping force will require the specification of legal status for every mission, the mechanism of synchronization or deconflicting effort, training, support, and joint operations of military and police teams.
We need to make sure that we have flexibility to properly use our peacekeeping forces. We need to have transparency and constant monitoring of their activities. Coordination is also needed for the national contingents and groups, so that we could use the principle of distribution of secondary roles and use the services of local suppliers. We need to increase the transparency of the functionality and of the costs of the peacekeeping missions. And finally, we need to use state-of-the-art technologies. The interests and goals should be cohesive, and that requires that all of the countries develop their specific potentials so that they could support such peacekeeping missions. And that reflects on both world powers and regional powers. Armenia sticks to this principle, and for over 2 decades, being in an unstable security-wise situation where the notions of war and peace are quite vague, Armenia has been developing in its defense potential and capability quite consistently, and it's also taking part in peacekeeping efforts. Armenia, being a country that has felt the price of international security and stability, has over the last 15 years accumulated a lot of experience in the area of peacekeeping. At present, Armenian peacekeeping forces are present at 4 international missions. We have also shown our consistency and commitment to providing assistance to effect positive changes that are war-torn or that are in a conflict or in a crisis, which is supported by the fact that we were participating in the humanitarian mission in Syria. This decision was made according to the request, official request from the legitimate Syrian government, and also a request from the Armenian diaspora from the Aleppo area with the help of the Ministry of Defense of Russia. And we are really grateful to the Russian government for that. In particular, the Armenian humanitarian contingent was deployed there because of the fact that historically the Armenian people have been living from time immemorial in that area, and that was our desire to preserve our roots in the region, especially considering the bitter experience of the 10 years of instability which caused the exodus of the Armenians from that area. And the humanitarian mission includes the medical staff and engineers that do the clearing of the mines, plus people that are providing help to the population of the Syrian Arab Republic. The Republic of Armenia is intent on continuing to contribute its efforts to the peacekeeping missions of different formats in various geographical and climatic and ethno-confessional areas. In order to achieve this goal, we are ready to use all of our capabilities and our field hospitals and people that are ready to clear makeshift IEDs. And I would like to assure you that Armenia stands for the use of international law unequivocally and for the rights of free choice, for reasonable globalization and the global security architecture based on the principle of not using force to resolve political goals and to avoid using militant rhetoric. As one of the leading experts on international relations said, when we try to implement our idealistic goals in foreign policies, states try to bring together its power with its moral principles and the faith in their fairness need to be modulated by common sense. That completes my presentation. I would like to thank you for your attention. Thank you, Mr. Tanayan. What you've just presented, your perspective on the international peacekeeping and the contribution your country made in this field is very useful, and I would like to thank you for your mission in the Syrian Arab Republic. The next speaker would be the Minister of Defense of Mongolia, Yanangil Engbold. Mr. Engbold has been in this position since October of 2017. He's an experienced official and politician. He speaks perfect Russian, and this is the second time he's taking part in this forum. Dear Minister, you get the floor. Dear colleagues, dear organizers and participants of this conference, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank the Minister of Defense of Russia for the invitation extended to me to participate in this conference. I'd like to thank the organizers of the conference to speak here. I would like to briefly talk about Mongolia's participation in peacekeeping operations of the United Nations, about our experience and what we can do, what we can offer other countries in terms of cooperation. As you all know, the UN's key mission is to ensure world peace and security. And as part of pursuing those goals, algorithm has been traditionally developing algorithms for cooperation in the area of peacekeeping. And the cornerstone of that is security and protection of civilians where conflicts take place. And this explains that peace enforcement and peacekeeping missions are done according to the seventh mandate of the United Nations under the Chapter 7 of the United Nations, which provides grounds for active and decisive action. It is with this goal in mind that our troops participate in such missions. Mongolia became a member of the United Nations in 1961. Since then, Mongolia has been contributing to achieving United Nations goals as it could. And today we have diplomatic relations with 190 countries of the world. We joined more than 60 international, regional, intergovernmental organizations. We became a member of more than 240 international treaties and compacts. And we continuously expand our participation in the UN affairs. And this is particularly focused on peace and security, peacekeeping, disarmament, support and development of democracy, accessible education, the role of women, and providing support to the countries that are landlocked. The legal basis for our participation in peacekeeping operations is based on our constitution that says that Mongolia has to pursue its foreign policies in accordance with the generally accepted norms of international law and commitment to the idea of peace, and also on the provisions of the national security concept document, which says that in order to assure independence and sovereignty of Mongolia is to engage in politics and diplomacy that should be centered on the principle of multipolar foreign policy, developing active relations with all countries of the world and international organizations, and being consistently committed to a policy that is aimed at ensuring peace and helping the international community in the area of ensuring lasting peace and security. Based on these principles and taking into consideration our capabilities, in 1997, we set up a specialized military unit with permanent personnel that could be involved in UN peacekeeping operations. At the same time, we started developing our own regulatory framework for that activity. In 1998, our parliament approved the fundamentals of our military and state policy that says that our armed forces, to ensure our state security and defense, need to follow the goals of creating favorable ambient conditions for the country, aiming at sustaining world peace and stability through cooperation with international missions, including humanitarian missions. In 1999, our government approved a decree on participation in the peacekeeping operation. We signed a memorandum of understanding regarding our participation or contribution to the UN peacekeeping forces. That was the start of building our regulatory framework for involving our troops in such activities. Then, further on in 2002, a law on participation of law enforcement and military personnel in peacekeeping and other international activities of the United Nations. And then later on in 2010, another law was adopted, the law on participation in the UN peacekeeping missions and in other organizations' missions. As a result, participation in the peacekeeping missions has become one of the responsibilities of the armed forces of Mongolia during peaceful time, and the position of the troops have become more clear. Today, Mongolia is taking steps to ensure that its troops participate in the contingents of the peacekeeping missions, and we follow the following approaches: expanding the scope of participation of the troops in such missions, providing support to humanitarian missions, active support to ensuring international regional security, building up peacekeeping potential of our own armed forces. In 2002, two of Mongolian troops were sent to the Democratic Republic of the Congo as observers at the mission of the United Nations. And until now, we've participated in 10 missions of the United Nations. More than 17,000 of our troops have participated. Observers, staff officers, and military contingents were sent to West Sahara, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Georgia, Sudan, Afghanistan, Sierra Leone, Chad, Central African Republic, Sudan, and the Republic of South Sudan. And today, there are 5 missions of the United Nations that are ongoing, where 900 participants from Mongolia take part, and 85% of them are women, which is one of the highest levels across all peacekeeping contingents. Our troops serve as staff officers, as observers, and as civilian police officers. Our people occupy such high positions in various missions, such as Deputy Commander of Peacekeeping Missions and heads of staff of mission sectors in the South Sudan. All in all, we have more than 90,000 of military troops, policemen, and civilians from all countries of the world. And as for the number of those troops that we send there, we are in the 26th place, and judging by the number of the peacekeepers per per capita of our population, we are in the second place, right next to Uruguay, which says a lot about our high level of participation in such activities. Over the 17 years of our participation in peacekeeping missions of the United Nations, our troops really performed their duties with diligence and duty, and they served to ensure security of facilities. They served as patrols and supported rapid deployment activities, protected civilians, and helped provide population with humanitarian assistance. Over these years, our military personnel has been able to acquire practical skills and state-of-the-art tactical methods of battle conduct, learn to use contemporary equipment and technology, and their level of professionalism and training has really increased dramatically, especially their adaptability to very unusual for them conditions, climatic and otherwise. They have the ability and the skills and the experience. They are disciplined, and this is something that was really appraised on the world arena, and the authority of Mongolia has grown as a result. The armed forces of Mongolia have regularly participated in joint exercises on multilateral and bilateral basis, and we took part in the general peacekeeping missions of the United Nations. We participate in regular drills with the Russian Federation, with Indonesia, India, Chinese People's Republic, Korea, Turkey, Cambodia, and Myanmar. We created here a center for peacekeeping operation according to the requirements that exist for the troops that will participate in international peacekeeping operations. And this center, since 2003, has been regularly conducting joint exercises and drills as conquests and the use of non-lethal weapons in peacekeeping operations, which is done together with the United States. For example, Darkhan and Silenge are done jointly with the armed forces of Russia. The Nomad Elephant together with the armed forces of India. And we also have drills on peacekeeping operations together with 4 other countries that are members of the Security Council of the United Nations, Anatolia, which is done together with the Turkish armed forces. These exercises allow us to build up our capability, the level of professionalism of our troops, share our experiences, and also contribute to the medical and the humanitarian component of these exercises. At the end of March of this year, I participated in the UN conference on peacekeeping at the ministerial level in New York. I met with the Secretary General Gutierrez and with Mr. Lacroix there as well. And they gave us a high assessment of our level of participation in peacekeeping missions. They really emphasized our discipline and how well they are trained, our troops. In future, we would be prepared to continue cooperating with all of the interested parties and share our experience in the following forms. Preparation of the military troops to perform the mission and participate in the United States peacekeeping missions, field and command and staff exercises to prepare the contingent before they are sent to their deployment areas, special courses for military observers and members of the United States, the United Nations staff, international and bilateral drills and exercises, seminars on confidence building between the countries in the region to ensure security and cooperation in the area. We intend to send our second infantry battalion to participate in peacekeeping missions, and we are ready to cooperate with all interested parties in this area. We believe that participation of our armed forces in peacekeeping operations of the United Nations and our active actions aimed at improving world security and stability, and mutual confidence and trust between countries, especially in the area of military cooperation. These are tangible steps towards implementing a very priority task of protecting the sovereignty and security of our own nation using diplomatic and political methods. Dear distinguished delegates, I would like to take this opportunity. I would like to tell you that our armed forces regularly take part in international army games that are organized by the Ministry of Defense on the annual basis. And this year, we will host one of such exercises in Mongolia, and would like to invite all of interested parties to take part. I believe that the Moscow Conference on International Security and the speeches made at this conference are very important to develop a common understanding of the issue of security and peace, so that we could identify where we could cooperate and build confidence around the world. I would like to wish you all in the success in the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for your comprehensive presentation. The information which was presented and the peacekeeping efforts of Mongolia should be very well accounted for, and UN should also take into account the readiness of Mongolian People's Republic for actions. I would like to invite the Minister of South Ossetia, Mr. Gaseev. Mr. Gaseev was appointed to this position in October 2016. Before that, he held different positions, including in the peacekeeping forces. Mr. Minister, the floor is yours. Esteemed ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, I would like to thank Russian side for the possibility to express our standpoint and position on peacekeeping aspects and share our experience. In 1994, the Parliament of Georgian Republic actually canceled the existence of our district, and the Georgian internal troops took over this territory, which led to an ethnic disaster and the loss of lives of dozens of thousands of peaceful citizens, and became a humanitarian catastrophe. In 1989-92, more than 100 settlements were burned down, and hundreds of thousands of citizens of South Ossetia became refugees. Although the Ossetian population was not exceeding the number of 70,000 people, and many Ossetians were forced from Georgia. On 24th of June 1992 in Sochi, between Russia and Georgia, we signed an agreement about the peaceful settlement of the Georgian South Ossetian conflict, which included ceasefire and withdrawal of armed forces from the line of conflict. Besides, a mixed commission was formed, which was supposed to control the ceasefire and withdrawal of armed forces, disbanding of self-defense troops, and to ensure security along the line of contact. And the groups of military observers and mixed forces were invited, and that agreement obliged the parties to enter into negotiations on economic restoration of the region and to create the conditions for the return of refugees. Blockades and sanctions were outlawed. In July 1992, the mixed forces were placed, and 12 observation posts were established on behalf of Russian and Georgian battalion and 6th from Ossetians. And the mission for these battalions were to ensure peacekeeping forces, 18 observers on every party was invited, and the mixed forces managed to stop the armed conflict and to ensure free movement of people in the area of conflict, to activize trade and commercial activity, to normalize social and political situation in the region. Preventive measures of observer and moving block posts contributed to stabilization of the situation at the place of contact. And thanks to the peacekeeping effort, primarily on behalf of the Russian servicemen, and the military confrontation ceased to exist. And the command of the Russian units, they guaranteed the peaceful settlement of the problem in the region. And thanks to the efforts of the peacekeeping contingents, basically of the Russians, in cooperation with international organization, we stopped the bloodshed and we placed the conflict on the political context, and that was a very successful peacekeeping operation, and this is the tribute of Russian Federation. The peacekeeping contingent managed to ensure stability and peace up to the summer of 2004, when under the auspices of struggle with smuggling, the internal troops of Georgia was used, and heavy weapons and armor was used, and Georgian authorities came to the conclusion that the basic problem is represented by Russian peacekeepers. And during the night of 7th of August, when the attention of the world was attracted by Beijing Olympic Games, Georgia initiated aggressive act against peaceful population of South Ossetia. They used heavy weapons, which they fired against the Russian peacekeeping battalion, which was located on the border between South Ossetia and Georgia. I invite everybody to see what happened with the positions of the Russian peacekeeping battalion, and you may very well see who unleashed these combat activities at that time. Under these circumstances, the Russian Federation had to protect the Russian peacekeepers from destruction and also protect the civilian population of South Ossetia. And the Russian troops forced the Georgian troops from South Ossetia, and when President of Russian Federation and France, the plan to regulate the conflict between Georgia and South Ossetia, that was the plan signed by Medvedev and Sarkozy, the French president. And regulation of South Ossetian Georgian conflict is a successful attempt of the Russian Federation. Very quickly, the most complicated questions were settled, and the legal framework was also created, which could be used in the zones of conflict and to ensure safety and security of civilian populations, and to envisage the plan for peaceful coexistence between the rival parties. And all these missions were accomplished. Every nation has the right for self-determination, and we, after the disintegration of the Soviet Union, we couldn't use this opportunity, and the war of August of 2008 had serious geopolitical and economic consequences. 26th of August in 2008, Russia accepted the independence, the status of independence of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. And the life got normalized, and my compatriots and the sacrifices made by the Russian peacekeepers, we've been granted this right for independence. And I would like to finish and quote the words of Thomas Wilson: no decision on the East will not be accepted without the role and influence of Russia. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Ibrahim, for your comprehensive presentation, and especially valued your own experience in the peacekeeping operation. Now the floor is given to the Minister of National Defense of Congo, Charles Monjour. In the past, he was a combat general and the Minister of Defense of Republic of Congo. He studied in Russia and speaks Russian. Mr. Minister, the floor is yours. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank the leadership of the Defense Minister of Russian Federation, who invited Republic of Congo to take part in this valuable platform for exchange of opinions in such an important issue like international security. And I'm going to talk about military cooperation with the Central African Republic, and we will also talk about the mechanism to support peace and security in Central African Republic. And everybody knows that cessation of Cold War for Africa brought the era of instability, civil conflicts inside the states, and Central African Republic became a line of crisis, which continued during the period of 20 years, and internal conflicts outbroke. And thanks to the Consultative Committee of United Nations on Security in Central African Republic, which was created in 2016 and signed in Cameroon, it's an important element which woke the community in Central Africa. And after a critical period, after 2018, the leaders decided to strengthen this union using the principles of peace and security. That was proclaimed in 1988 to proclaim Africa the area of peace and solidarity. In 1990, an Oku Pax protocol was created, which was signed in Equatorial Guinea. That is an agreement of mutual help between the member states of Central Africa, Oku Pax. It's an important input, a decisive input in construction of architecture of peace and security on the African continent. And once the protocol came to force after 2002, the decisive input in creation of African Union, OCOPAC also envisaged the principles of peace and between the countries, and a declaration of solidarity of the countries which belong to this region. And we could see the clear link which led to the Memorandum of Mutual Cooperation, Security between the countries and regional organizations. So what are the missions which were accomplished? Early warning system for collective security, we also support the general principle of the regional principles to develop the measures of trust between the member states, anticipation and solution of the conflicts, and simplification of certain processes, and improvement of democratical principles in Africa. Preventive diplomacy principles were actively used, cooperation between police and jurisdiction bodies, and deployment of peacekeeping missions. And what achievements could we outline? Despite serious difficulties, we proceeded further, and the basic successes are as follows. That is the architecture of peace and security, development of policy of collective security, management of conflicts and crises, a strengthening of international partnership. What was done in implementation field during 15 years? This architecture continues to exist. We organize meetings and rallies. We use the principles of rotation. These organizations consist of three basic bodies, which also represent the mechanism of decision-making: the councils of ministers, foreign officers, a commission on defense and security at the level of the chiefs of staff, of respective heads of police and other law enforcement bodies. In order to accomplish the decisions and to use the operational instruments, we have a committee of ambassadors in Libreville, early warning mechanism in Central Africa, and the community has the capability to launch the mechanisms of preventive diplomacy. Multinational forces of Central Africa, these are the African quick or rapid deployment force. They also organize the training centers, which invite peacekeeping troops to improve their skills. And we received a number of political and operational tools which improved matters of awareness and information. And processes related to strategies and development of policies in cross-border areas, the strategy for maritime security, the Kinshasa Protocol, also the documents which will help to root out terrorism and extremism in Central Africa. Since 2008, we coordinate efforts in the Western African region. So crisis management includes the preventive diplomacy, which considerably restrains the formation of new conflicts. And in the framework of regulation in Central African Republic, the experience is very widely used to strengthen peace in Central African Republic. And the lesson learned confirmed the overall importance in crisis management on the regional level, with the participation of neighboring countries. However, the problems which we face today is described as lesser participation of the leaders of the neighboring countries in this process. So what is really required is to establish more important partnership links and communications. And the European Union, as part the UN, using the African Union and also using the Permanent Consultative Council of the United Nations, created this issue on security in Central Africa. And also in Lisbon, at the summit in 2007, a general strategy of the European Union was adopted, which essentially adopted a wide-ranging partnership. And one of the 8 areas would be to ensure security and peace. Plus, there are friendly countries, the G4 countries, that develop practical cooperation. Which areas could we identify here? The factors that are important. In addition to the efforts made in order to achieve the goal of security, the fact is that the agenda of peace and security in Central Africa continues to face multiple challenges that are associated with the establishment of an African architecture of peace and security. And in order to address these challenges, we need to emphasize the logistical independence by better implementing strategies for funding African Union, which could contribute to the regional level with interesting solutions by improving the contribution of partners. Also, we could improve the geographic and political cohesion of the region and strengthen the strategic and operative partnership with the European Union and the United Nations by better use of the principles of mutual substitution and relative advantages. It turns out that for many programs, leadership is something that is disputed. And the case with moving or transitioning the peacekeeping mission in Central African Republic from the multinational forces in Central Africa that acted under the auspices of the Economic and Currency Community of the Central African countries, and the mission on peacekeeping at the Central African Republic, which was done under the African Union, and also the multi-profile comprehensive mission of the United Nations that is acting under the auspices of the United Nations within 1 year. All of this is proof that this international cooperation is not really that stable. We need to find solutions to new threats that stand in the way of existing mechanisms, the propagation of combat weapons, the mutation and expansion of international terrorism and organized crime in various forms require that we take new approaches and develop necessary competencies. And that is why, when we take into account the fact that the emergence of conflicts is very often related to failed
internal security policies and weak international interaction between enforcement agencies, it is important to contribute or continue contributing to development of a strategic partnership so that we could build the capabilities of countries and coordinate international cooperation between judicial and police agencies. And in conclusion, I would like to say that my country, the Republic of the Congo, is one of the 11 countries of the Union of the Central Africa, and we are confident that we need to implement this international cooperation, starting with the regional level. And logistics here is often transborder with its specific dynamics. And as part of the African Union agenda of 2023, we need to stop the weapons in Africa from making sounds. And in order to do this, we need to reduce conflict situations and lack of stability and security in the region. This is our main objective. We need to create a condition for regional integration and economic and social development. The search for solutions for new challenges has shown that we need to implement deep institutional reform. However, in order to implement them, it is necessary to have coordinated measures to be taken, and the reform of the African safety and security and stability architecture should be implemented. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Mr. Minister, for your interesting and engaging presentation about the experience of the Congo Defense Ministry in the area of peacekeeping and about the general situation on the African continent. I would like to give the floor to the First Deputy Defense Secretary, Mr. Sanjay Mitra. Mr. Sanjay Mitra is a doctor of science. He's a well-known Indian politician and government official. He's been in this position since May of this year, of 2018, and would like to listen to your opinion about peacekeeping from the Indian vantage point. You get the floor.
Chairman, defense ministers and other dignitaries, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Before I begin, I would like to extend our deep condolences to our Sri Lankan brethren over the loss of precious life during the recent terrorist attacks. As a country that has faced cross-border terrorism for decades, India stands in solidarity with Sri Lanka. India is determined to protect its security interests in the face of cross-border terrorism and supports measures of the international community to isolate countries that harbor terrorist groups on their soil. Ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I wish to compliment the organizers of this conference for the outstanding arrangements. I am extremely happy to attend the 8th Moscow Conference on International Security and delighted to have this great opportunity to express my thoughts on the topic, International Peacekeeping Efforts, New Perceptions and Military Cooperation. The Moscow Conference has become one of the key global platforms for the deliberation on defense and security matters. The theme of this session addresses a very important aspect of international security. There are new dimensions and perceptions of peacekeeping in the current global scenario. We support the initiatives taken by nations towards peacekeeping efforts. However, today I'll restrict my thoughts only to UN peacekeeping efforts because India participates in international peacekeeping only under the UN flag. Distinguished delegates, over the last 7 decades, the United Nations has been effective in preventing conflict, bringing peace to conflict-torn areas, and limiting sufferings of people in countries affected by conflicts. Since its inception in 1945, a number of important peacekeeping measures have been undertaken by the UN are testimony to its commitment to world peace. The UN protects hundreds and thousands of civilians, supports political solutions to conflict, and helps preserve ceasefire. I take pride in informing the esteemed delegates that India is one of the founding members of the UN and has been contributing towards its peacekeeping efforts since 1956, when the first ever mission was established. In fact, India is the largest cumulative contributor of UN peacekeeping personnel, having provided more than 200,000 personnel since inception. Currently, we have deployed contingents in 4 missions and staff officers and military observers in 9 missions, contributing over 6,000 personnel in UN missions as the 4th largest troop contributing country. So far, India has provided 15 force commanders and a number of other senior level officers to the UN. The outcomes of the peacekeeping missions are a mixed bag. Successful missions include Liberia, Sierra Leone, Timor, and Cambodia, where the UN was able to help the countries in transiting from conflict to peace. There are others that have been not as successful. Ladies and gentlemen, over the last 7 decades, we've seen a paradigm shift in UN's approach to peacekeeping. The UN did not envisage the requirement of its own fighting force during its inception in 1945, now has a well-articulated system for the selection and deployment of contingents and individual officers through the newly established Peacekeeping Capability Readiness System. This will enable the UN to find required capability for rapid deployment in conflict zones. The experience and expertise gained by the member states, especially in new missions, would be very useful for the UN. The nature of conflict has changed over the last 70 years. Earlier missions were primarily intended to prevent conflict between nation states. The requirements were clear-cut, and the mission was relatively simple. Today, we are witnessing a shift in the nature of conflict to predominantly intra-state conflict that creates instability in the nation-state itself. Non-state actors and global terror outfits pose major challenges to UN and its member states. Peacekeeping missions in the 21st century have become most challenging, complex, and high-risk due to the asymmetric nature of threats, lack of clear identification of parties to conflict, low-intensity conflict environment coupled with the requirement of resources, information, infrastructure, funds, and the need for capacity building of UN peacekeepers and the affected nations. Peacekeepers today have a very challenging task in bringing peace, fighting non-state actors, or a state in a state of civil war amidst immense humanitarian crises. Currently, most of the 18 missions deployed since the year 2000 are under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. The situation on ground demands proactive peacekeeping to enforce peace. There may be a case to deviate from certain principles of peacekeeping, that is, non-use of force except in self-defense and defense of mandate, and consent of all parties to conflict. In such situations, the United Nations should ensure adequate legal protection and resources for the peacekeepers to operate. Robust peacekeeping has certain requirements in terms of intelligence and offensive tools, which was not the case in traditional missions. The mandate must explicitly provide for such operations in peacekeeping missions. There may be a good case for the UN to think on a global counter-terrorism action plan to counter the emerging threat of non-state actors. 21st century peacekeeping is not just about observing 2 warring factions and bringing them to the negotiating table. Today, peacekeeping entails a wide range of activity to include assisting the government in fighting the insurgent, infrastructure development, social and economic assistance, and the conduct of elections. The mandate given to the peacekeepers are ambitious, but the resources are limited. I am of the view that the UN will have to focus on certain specific needs of the conflict zone to achieve desired results, and which I would like to share with you. Friends, mandate assignment is a crucial task that decides the end state in UN mission. These are required to be carefully deliberated upon, and it is recommended that all stakeholders, including the member states, should be consulted prior to formulating the mandate. Though this aspect has been highlighted in the Secretary General's action for peacekeeping, there is a need to make all stakeholders accountable for the preparation and execution of the mandate. Primacy of politics. Conflicts are mainly political in nature in most of the conflict zones. The importance of politics in solving the disputes is aptly identified as one of the important parameters in the Secretary General's action plan for peacekeeping and declaration of shared commitment document to which India is a signatory. The importance of regional players is very important. Finding a lasting peace to conflict-torn region requires the assistance and active participation of all the regional players. The involvement of regional players will hasten the process. A case in point is the emerging peace process in South Sudan, with the assistance of the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, mainly Sudan and Uganda. The African Union is also employed in a similar way in a number of African missions, to include MONUSCO in DR Congo and UNAMID in Darfur. A number of countries possess peacekeeping experience, which can be fruitfully utilized to enhance the capability of UN peacekeepers. The initiatives by the UN, such as triangular partnership projects and the light coordination mechanism, are cases in point. the member states can contribute toward the funding, equipping, and training the countries contributing troops. India has a wealth of peacekeeping experience and is contributing toward the capability enhancement of UN peacekeepers through its Center for UN Peacekeeping Operations located in Delhi, which has so far trained more than 1,700 officers from foreign countries and more than 7,000 officers from India. India has sent its trainers and is conducting UN-designated courses. We have also taken the initiative by assisting the member states in training their peacekeeping contingents through mobile training teams and field training exercises. Recently, India has conducted a field training exercise for 18 African countries in Pune in March 2019. Similar bilateral and multilateral cooperation between member states will enhance the capability of the member states in contributing towards peacekeeping efforts. We need to do more on critical capabilities such as intelligence acquisition and sharing devices, rapid reaction capabilities, special forces, and strategic and tactical lift capabilities. Pledging of these critical capabilities will enable the UN to execute the mandate fruitfully. As a part of our contribution to enablers, India has deployed 4 hospitals, varying from levels 1 to 3, 1 engineering company, 1 petroleum platoon, and 1 force signal unit. In addition, India has pledged 1 rapidly deployable infantry battalion, 1 engineering company, 1 signal company, and 1 force military police platoon, besides 10 officers and military observers in the United Nations Peacekeeping Capability Readiness System. We look towards a much larger role in capability enhancement. India is a signatory of the Voluntary Compact on the Circle of Leadership. We have also contributed towards the Sexual Exploitation and Abuse Trust Fund and pipelines to peacekeeping command programs. In a first of its kind, a company of Kazakhstan troops is co-deployed under the operational control of an Indian battalion in UNIFIL, Lebanon. This unique experiment, which has worked quite well so far, will pave the way for troop contributing countries with experience to contribute to the capability development of new countries ready to deploy troops in UN peacekeeping efforts. The protection of civilians is a primary mandate given to most of the missions currently established by the UN. This mandate can only be successfully undertaken if adequate resources are committed. The UN should have capability to protect civilians, not only those living in the IDP camps or the protection of civilians camps, but also people living in remote areas in the conflict zone. For this, it may be necessary to empower the national armies of the conflict-affected countries in enforcing peace. Hence, security sector reform should be given due priority. UN peacekeepers are often targeted, and a number of peacekeepers have lost their lives. India, too, has sacrificed the lives of 164 personnel while fighting under the UN flag. The security of peacekeepers can only be addressed by providing them with adequate resources. The UN has taken a number of initiatives, including the implementation of the recommendation of the Cruise Committee report. Well-trained and equipped troops by contributing countries will ensure limiting or preventing attacks on UN peacekeepers. UN must ensure that all parties to the conflict are signatories in the Status of Forces Agreement. If this is not done, the UN force will be constrained by the restrictions imposed by various parties to conflict, thereby affecting the execution of mandate. South Sudan is a case in point. There is also a need for the UN to politically address the issues between the host government and the UN missions. The delay in provision of clearances and other administrative assistance are hindering the function of the UN. Women and children are the worst affected in conflict, and we must undertake measures to ensure that they are protected. The Secretary General has asked for meaningful participation of women at all stages of peace process. Therefore, deployment of women peacekeepers should be enhanced. India is committed to this and will be deploying a female engagement team along with a rapid deployable battalion in Congo in August 2019. Toward gender parity, UN has stipulated 15% of women staff officers and military observers by 2018 to be increased to 28% in 2028. We have already deployed 15% of female peacekeepers and military staff officers and military observers. A training course for women peacekeepers is being held in Delhi in our institute. Economic and social backwardness needs to be addressed by the UN in various conflict zones. Development projects and creation of infrastructure will not only address the operational requirement of the UN peacekeeping force, but also assist in the development of the host country. Nothing can damage the credibility of UN more than the instances of sexual exploitation and abuse by its own employees. Such instances, when they come to light, have a very damaging effect on the image of the UN and undermine the overall objectives set out by the mission. The UN has become very tough on this issue and instituted a strong measure to address it. Troop contributing countries play an important role. India, as a responsible member state, ensures that its troops are well trained on this issue. At the deliberations in the UN, India continues to stress the need for serious and institutionalized consultation of troop contributing countries in mandate formulation, the need for adequate resources, appropriate caution on the issue of robust mandates and legal safeguards for troops in offensive operations, positive implementation of the recommendation of the peacekeeping review process. We also recommend that issues of logistics support raised by the member states are addressed to make the mechanism robust. Ladies and gentlemen, evidence shows that conflict happens when people lose trust in governance. The pressures on the world are going by day, and the world community needs to look into this aspect seriously to ensure peace. International peacekeeping is a topic of contemporary relevance in enhancing regional and global security. I take this opportunity to thank the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation once again to have taken up this topic of international peacekeeping for discussion in this plenary session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mitra. Thank you for your comprehensive presentation. Your assessment to support peacekeeping operations in the framework of United Nations, especially protection of rights of children and women. Now I would like to give the floor to the Deputy Minister of Defense of Paraguay, Madam Gladys Peche. Madam Peche is responsible for defense policy, and she is one of the authors of the National Defense Strategy of Paraguay, and she is for the first time participating in our forum. The floor is yours, madam.
Saludo a los participantes de la 8ª Conferencia
Welcome
Internacional
all
de Seguridad.
participants of the 8th International Conference on
Al
Security.
señor Ministro de Defensa de la Federación
And I would
Rusa
like to express my gratitude to Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, General of the Army Shoigu, and to all organizers of this so important forum. We are being present here for the first time, and we have a lot to say in the sphere of cooperation to support peace. Southern America is the area of peace. We do not have any interstate conflicts, but we got many problems, and we have lots of threats concerning international crime organizations and natural disasters, which is a big problem for our continent. However, we have established excellent cooperation between the Latin American countries. Paraguay is a pacifist country, and naturally it takes part in many peacekeeping operations. And peacekeeping operations is a response to the events which took part in various places of the world. And this type of activity is a visible mechanism to settle disputes and conflicts on behalf and under the auspices of the United Nations organizations. Once the world became full of most various types of conflicts, and UN confronted some of these crises and challenges, and was supposed to develop a strategy, both peacekeeping and prevention operations to establish peace, however fragile it might be. We heard a lot here about the precedence of this type of policy on behalf of my colleagues, and Paraguay became one of 51 countries which signed the Charter
of creation of United Nations in October of 1945. A system of peacekeeping operations of United Nations was created with the purpose to ensure the preservation of peace and safety in the scale of the planet, and becomes one of the backbones of perception how to preserve peace. And this is a response to specific events to preserve peace. And this system builds up trust and cooperation between the countries and ensures the right of nations for self-determination and equality. To ensure these necessary conditions of overwhelming peace, a very intricate structure was created, which finally turned out to be the United Nations organizations, and the efforts to develop this system made a serious footprint on the life of hundreds of millions of people all over the world. We attentively watch the operation of the system, proceeding from our deep conviction that the creation of atmosphere of peace only in case elementary rights, human rights, and the level of well-being is ensured. The peacekeeping operation are carried out on the mandate of the Security Council of United Nations, and in line of accomplishment of these missions, we see the growing number of problems. We are faced to spend a lot of efforts to ensure peace all over the world. And the types of missions which are supposed to be settled by the Security Council are most diverse. However, they have a lot in common. Peacekeeping operations should be used not only to preserve existing peace, but also to prevent possible conflicts, to ensure the security of the borders, to ensure quiet situation at cross-border areas. We have to strive also to provide help to the governments to maintain peaceful accords which they sign with other countries, and to ensure peaceful transition from one government to another, transition based on the principles of democracy and missions of development. And now, I would like to share our experience with you and with the conclusions which we came while we were conducting peacekeeping operations. The presence of Paraguay in these operations became visible from the time once Paraguay stood up together with other Southern American countries, primarily in peacekeeping operation, which was staged in Dominican Republic in 1965 up to July 1966. We sent a contingent consisting of 220 men. In 1999, signed a memorandum of understanding, and in line of accomplishment of this memorandum, in 2001, the armed forces of Paraguay started to send observers and staff officers in different operations of United Nations all over the world. As military observers, We have 666 officers are accomplishing the missions of military observers and staff officers in Southern Sudan, in Central African Republic, Colombia, and 666 officers underwent the school, and now at present we have 16 officers in Cote d'Ivoire, in Afghanistan, in Nepal, and in Western Sahara. And Paraguay also made an input in terms of military force, and in Argentina, a military mission on Cyprus. In 1998, we signed one more memorandum on the basis of which, in the year of 2000, we sent a platoon of Paraguayan military, which was also part of the Argentinian military mission on Cyprus. And all in all, there were 440 people and 12 Paraguayan officers. The staff officers of Paraguay Army were part also of Brazilian battalion of the peacekeeping force, which took part in stabilizing the political situation in Haiti. All in all, the Brazilian battalion consisted of 550 officers, and Paraguayan platoon stayed in Haiti until May 2005, and we were also part of the Uruguay battalion,
donde las fuerzas militares han desplegado 2 oficiales subalternos como parte del Estado Mayor del
which in
Batallón
the year of
Uruguay 4 en la
2015
misión de
took part
estabilización de las Naciones Unidas
in
en la
the
República Democrática del Congo.
UN mission which was organized in Democratic Republic of Congo, and that mission also included 15 officers from Paraguay. We also took part in the missions where we carried our own banner, our own flag, and last time it was in 2010, we sent our contingent under the flag of Paraguay. That was a UN peacekeeping mission, but the basic contingent was represented by Paraguay. This contingent consisted of the engineers company, and this Paraguay contingent was deployed since December of 2011 until December of 2013, and about 130 men and officers served in that mission. Then we were forced to reduce our contingent because of the overall reduction of peacekeeping strength all over the world. As a whole, 6 military and technical companies of Paraguay participated in these missions until the time when it was discontinued. As a whole, the armed forces of Paraguay participated in dozens of operations, and the result of this we could say
positivo para las Fuerzas Armadas,
that
donde la evaluación
the
puede ser medida
influence on the operation,
observando
on the
el
training of armed
fortalecimiento del
forces is
personal
very
en
important.
cuanto a su entrenamiento táctico y técnico, incremento de sus
That made it
capacidades
possible for
y
us
habilidades,
to improve
desarrollando
the
una
methods
madurez
of
profesional
training, acting in most various
una situación
conditions,
real
and
donde debe poner en
upgrading
práctica
skills in
todo su
solution of
conocimiento
technical
y
and
experiencia
engineering
en el área de
tasks.
misión.
Our personnel had to adapt to specific geographical and ethnical conditions. We also had to undergo training in the sphere of human rights.
De este tipo de conflictos. Hemos participado con oficiales
We participated
en el Congo.
in
total, con
operations
dos
in
oficiales.
Congo.
En el Congo tuvimos 2, en el batallón de Uruguay 16. Y las posibilidades
Uruguay
nacionales
battalion
de
took
cooperación
part in that
internacional
mission,
con las Naciones Unidas,
and we had two
proyecto
Paraguay
de una
officers
compañía
as
paraguaya
part
de
of that
ingeniería de
battalion.
construcción multirol. En ese sentido, las fuerzas militares el año pasado
At
nombra
present,
oficiales como
we
integrantes de la Comisión de
continue
Planeamiento
to keep
para la planificación
engineering
de un futuro
company
despliegue
which
de la
is well
compañía de
trained and
ingeniería
could
de
be
construcción
further
como una
used
nueva
in
misión de paz
similar operations.
bajo mandato de las Naciones Unidas.
We are preparing it for a new missions which will comply to the mandate of UN organization. In February of the current year,
Aprobándose
that is our engineering company,
demostrando así Paraguay su interés
it is
y
part of the
cooperación
database
nuevamente
of the
con una
Security
unidad
Council
combativa
of United Nations,
propia y
and
tenga se encuentra en la
Paraguay
primera
expressed
etapa de
its
su
own
organización
desire to
con
continue
la misma
cooperation
ubicación de
with
la
the
primera
UN
fase de la misión.
in these missions with our own flag.
Los conflictos de hoy en día, como hemos escuchado, aunque son
Modern
menores en
conflicts,
número, están
as was
profundamente
mentioned more
arraigados.
than once
Por ejemplo, en la
today,
República Democrática del Congo y en Sudán del Sur
have their
se
roots
encuentran
deeply
actualmente
in
en la
social
segunda o
and
tercera
economic
ola de
conditions of
conflictos.
many countries,
Además,
and such
muchos
countries
de
as the
ellos
Democratic
se complican
Republic of Congo and other countries of
debido
equatorial
a los
Africa
factores
are
regionales que son
surviving
claves para poder resolver.
second and
De
third
hecho,
wave
en la
of social
actualidad,
conflicts,
alrededor
and
de dos
we have to
tercios
take
del
into
personal
account most
procedimiento
various
de la paz
national and
de la
regional
ONU
factors.
están desplegados en conflictos
Now,
en curso,
two-thirds of
en los que
peacekeeping
los acuerdos de
contingent
paz
of United
son
Nations
inestables
are
o inexistentes.
deployed in
Asimismo,
different
los
countries of
conflictos
Central
son cada
Africa,
vez más intensos,
where
ya que con ellos
security
participan determinados grupos
is
armados con
very
accesos
poor
a
or
armamentos y
doesn't
técnicas
exist at all.
sofisticadas.
And
La
most
naturaleza
various
de los
groups
conflictos
of
también ha
terrorists
cambiado a
have
lo largo de estos
unlimited
años.
access
En
to
primer
modern
momento,
weapons
las
and
operaciones de
equipment.
mantenimiento de paz se desarrollaron como medio para tratar conflictos entre estados, pero se están aplicando cada vez más en conflictos interestatales y en guerras civiles. Si bien el componente militar
Interstate
continúa
conflicts
siendo la
sometimes
espina dorsal de
are
estas
accompanied
operaciones, hoy en
by the
día,
internal
las
conflicts and
tropas
civil
de
wars. So
mantenimiento de la
peacekeeping
paz
organizations
desempeñan una amplia
very
variedad
often
de complejas tareas.
are
Desde
conducted
ayudar a construir instituciones de gobierno
in difficult
sostenibles,
situations
hasta
and
supervisar
facing
el
very
respeto a
intricate
los derechos
missions
humanos,
to
pasando por el
ensure
desarme,
stable
la
and create stable
desmovilización y la reintegración de
governmental
excombatientes
institutions,
y el
or
despliegue.
for humanitarian
Paraguay
aspects
tiene
for
planes en
training
continuar
and
y
return
desarrollar
former
e
insurgents
implementar
into
los
civil
cursos
life.
para operaciones de
And the
mantenimiento
most
de
important
paz.
mission is to
Realizar
organize
cursos,
training
seminarios
courses
conforme
for
a los
operations to
requerimientos y a
support
las necesidades.
peace. That means seminars and workshops in line with the requirements. We need to continue training of personnel of our multipurpose company. In coordination with the command of the armed forces, to train the personnel to be deployed in future peacekeeping operations, and to continue the exchange of instructors with regional centers of training, and also to elaborate proposals for military and police missions to support peace. Paraguay offered 3 locations for training centers for peacekeepers, for foreign citizens, and for joint support of peace in most various regions of the world. Besides, once in 6 months, we issue digital information dedicated to the peacekeeping operations, and Paraguay is a member of Latin American Association of Peacekeeping Centers. In 2016, our country was chairing these associations, and finally, I'd like to say that only with joint efforts we could establish peace. And here, a constructive dialogue between our countries is very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pecci, for your very substantive presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, our final presenter today is Piotr Tikhanovsky, who is the assistant to the Secretary General of CSTO. He is a former military since 2013 until 2015. He was the Chief of Staff of the Republic of Belarus. You get the floor. Dear participants, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to the organizers of the conference for the opportunity to speak today and exchange and share our opinions about the peacekeeping topic. Peacekeeping, we heard a lot about it today, is an instrument we have to use sometimes to respond to destructive forces in the world that sometimes use and provoke interethnic and interconfessional strife in the various regions to achieve their ends. Recently, the probability of such conflicts arising has gotten higher, and without using peacekeeping technologies, resolving those conflicts would be essentially difficult or sometimes impossible. Peacekeeping has been going on for 70 years, and these years have allowed us to develop mechanisms to use our resources and troops in the most effective way to ensure peace and stability. What is even more important in this field is the role of international organizations, including the Collective Security Treaty Organization, and its goal is to maintain peace and stability in the Eurasian space. When we make decisions regarding the development of our capabilities, we proceeded from the need to use that capability for peacekeeping operations, primarily in those areas that are of strategic importance for the countries that are members of the CSTO organization, and of course in strict compliance with the UN Charter. And our organization as a body hasn't yet participated on its own in peacekeeping missions, but given that the instability in regions is growing, especially in the areas bordering with the CSTO area, peacekeeping is regarded as one of the priority areas for the activities of our organizations. We are consistently working towards developing a regulatory base and framework for this. As CSTO, together with the collective forces of rapid response, we have developed 3,600 troops and 800 of them are law enforcement police officers, plus experts from the national law enforcement agencies. The peacekeeping contingents from the CSTO member states get prepared following the uniform programs for the CSTO nations, and they are equipped with compatible or the same types of weapons, control and communication devices. And their readiness to act together is tested and checked during drills, such as the inalienable brotherhood types of drills, and we've had a series of these drills. An important element of peacekeeping is the fact that member states of CSTO have a lot of experience of their own in peacekeeping operations. And we have experts and groups of people that have participated in various peacekeeping missions of the United Nations. And also that includes OSCE and Iran, Iraq, Libya, West Sahara, Kosovo, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and participated in the peacekeeping missions in Nagorno-Karabakh, Georgia, and other parts of the region. Their experience is definitely used to develop the potential of CSTO, and the STO has really taken well the initiative of the Secretary General of the United Nations to improve the peacekeeping potential of this organization that concentrates all peacekeeping experience of the world. The desire of the United Nations to interact more closely with the regional organizations when conducting peacekeeping missions meets the interests of our organization, and we beef up our efforts in this field. We, in general, welcome the declaration adopted on the 25th of September last year regarding common declaration on peacekeeping of the United Nations. At the same time, we believe that the position that was expressed at the high-level meeting at the, by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, at the United Nations on a number of points of this document, in particular, what requires deeper understanding, the emphasis on involving the civil society in the peacekeeping efforts and all layers of the civilian population, and the diminishing role of the governments of hosting nations. The needs of support for peacekeeping missions that are implemented by regional organizations such as the African Union. We believe that this is something that is needed, and we as a regional organization, we support the call for the involvement of regional organizations in peacekeeping and conflict resolution. These organizations should play a key role. However, the key role of the Security Council of the United Nations should become unchanging. It should be the central role, and we just need to fit into the global UN activities in this field. In order to implement these activities, in September of 2012, a memorandum of understanding between the Secretariat of the CSTO and the Department for Peacekeeping Operations in the United Nations. And at the Secretariat, we have formed a roadmap on approaches to using CSTO's peacekeeping potential in the interest of the United Nations global peacekeeping field until 2025. The plan calls for the following. In the next 3 to 4 years, create a very solid organizational and regulatory framework that will allow us to use CSTO peacekeepers under the UN mandates in peacekeeping missions if such a decision is made. We constantly monitor the needs of the United Nations in peacekeeping troops, including trained police officers. And CSTO has such a resource that we are willing to share, and we are currently working on ensuring that our police officers can participate in peacekeeping missions of the United Nations following the standard operating procedures in order to assess the potential of such units. And we received that from the Peacekeeping Operations Department at the United Nations. We studied that and we will act on that. We work on making sure that we are always prepared, and we are using the potential of the All-Russian Institute for Training of law enforcement officers, and since September of 2017 we hold annual drills, and we started testing these units, whether they are going to be able to perform the function and perform their mission properly if deployed to a peacekeeping mission. In September and October of this year, we're going to conduct the training in Tajikistan. We are quite happy with the interactions with our Red Cross colleagues. The experience accumulated by this organization over 150 years is quite precious to us. We are developing our cooperation in this area with the Migration International Organization, and as part of our exercises, we exercise how to control migration streams and flows that can emerge if the situation flares up in one of the regions which is on the borderline with the CSTO area of responsibility. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion of my presentation, I would like to emphasize that the mechanism created by CSTO, together with all members of our organization, the potential that we have created, is a very important element of the system of collective security of CSTO. It's something that can be potentially used together with other organizations within UN peacekeeping missions, and I think that will contribute to those missions' effectiveness. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Peter, for your very good presentation, for the information that you provided. I think that the United Nations should probably take notice of this capability to tap into this potential of the CSTO that we just saw explained to us. Dear ladies and gentlemen, this completes our third plenary session. I would like to thank you all for your participation. My special thanks go out to our speakers. And I would like to announce a 15-minute break, and we will reconvene here again at noon. Thank you very much. It's going to be the fourth session.